Welcome to Know Your Food, the podcast where we explore the world of food by speaking with farmers, makers, entrepreneurs, and experts who are reshaping how we think about what we eat. I'm your host, Michael Ray Robinov, CEO and co-founder of Farm to People, and we're recording these conversations live from our warehouse in Bushwick, Brooklyn. In today's episode, I sit down with three leaders transforming New York's regional grain and flour movement. Heidi Dolnick is the founder of Unified Mills, a young, mission-driven mill bridging home bakers and independent farmer-driven mills. She works to highlight craftsmanship, regional diversity, and the care behind every bag of flour. Makayla Bunce is one of the millers at Farmer Ground Flour, helping turn locally grown grains into flour that supports more than a dozen farms across New York State while keeping flavor, nutrition, and sustainability at the forefront. Thor Oechsner is the founder of Oechsner Farms, a regenerative organic grain farm in New York with decades of experience advancing sustainable and resilient farming practices. We dive into the journey from field to flour, how small-scale milling and regenerative practices preserve flavor, nutrition, and digestibility. Heidi, Makayla, and Thor share candid insights into the challenges of running a regional grain business, the importance of proper harvest and storage, and why real human-scale flour can transform baking, health, and communities. This conversation celebrates the farmers, millers, and bakers who are working to make flour meaningful again from soil to table. If you enjoy today's episode, please subscribe and share it with someone who cares about bread, grains, and the stories behind their food. Now here is my conversation with Heidi Dolnick, Makayla Bunce, and Thor Oechsner. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Excited to kick it off with our largest panel yet. I think great way to start, just so that everybody knows who's who. Could each of you share your name, your organization, and a bit about how your work fits into the regional grain ecosystem? Do you want to start, Makayla?
Sure. My name is Makayla Bunce. I am one of the millers at Farmer Ground Flour. We have quite a few millers now. I've been with them for about 5.5 years. And we use majority local New York State grains, and we're selling to New York State. So from local to local, and that's great.
My name is Thor Oechsner. I own Oechsner Farms, and I'm a partner in Farmer Ground Flour and also Wide Awake Bakery, which is a bakery up in Ithaca. We farm 1,200 acres. We're certified, USDA certified organic and now ROC certified regenerative. We grow food grade polenta type corn, hard red spring wheat, hard red winter wheat, einkorn, rye, 2 different types of buckwheat, common buckwheat and Himalayan Tartary buckwheat, which you may not have heard of, and lots and lots of different cover crops that we grow in a 7-year crop rotation. And I'm really happy to be here. I've already met some of you who use our product, and I'll just say that that is really inspiring for me to meet, people that are interested in this and then take that back to the farm, and it gives me a lot of energy to continue to do what we do. So.
Hi, everybody. I'm Heidi Dolnick. I founded Unified Mills Flour and Grain a couple of years ago, so it's pretty new. And the brand seeks to bridge the disconnect between home bakers and all the flour coming out of these incredible mills that are like Farmer Ground Flour, independent, non-commodity, working directly with farmers and specializing in the grains of their region and showing real craftsmanship and attention to the art of milling.
Awesome. Thank you all. And jumping into the topic of tonight, which is really taking on big flour. Right now we have, the fighters on the front lines of trying to bring smaller, regenerative, organic farming, and flour operations to the forefront, and making that accessible to you is critical, and we're going to learn more about why. I want to start with you, Heidi, on what's the current state of flour in America today, and why should we all care?
Yeah. So the flour at the grocery store, I feel like everybody already knows this, but when you go to the grocery store, the typical flour you get is white anonymous powder. And most people don't really think of flour as anything other than that. And the reason that that is the case is because the grain system in this country is very broken, it's very consolidated. Cargill is the largest privately held company in the world, and they control all the vertical steps on the grain supply chain. So when large conglomerates like Cargill control all the steps on the chain, they're able to push down prices farther and farther and create a product that they sort of want people to think is all you need for wonderful baking. And so we've kind of been trained to think that this is all we need. But in reality, that's not what flour is. So, the problem is on both ends. On the consumer side, home bakers don't know that actually flour is so different from that. It's diverse and flavorful and nutritious and exciting, and also differs from place to place. New York flour is very different from California flour, for example. And so home bakers don't even know that they have options. They're missing out on all this incredible flour. And then on the supply side, the prices are just being driven lower and lower. And so the farmers are getting paid pennies on the dollar. So really, across the entire value chain, this is a huge problem. And I love doing what I'm doing because I'm surrounded by people who agree and are doing really amazing things to try to chip away at, how did we get here?
Yeah, just ask and dig a little bit deeper into that. I think that's one thing that we talk about a lot at Farm to People. The average farmer across the whole food supply chain is earning about 13 to 15 cents of the food dollar at a supermarket level. What you mentioned, right before we got up here, was that flour farmers are seeing 6 to 8 cents of every food dollar. At your mill at Farmer Ground, and maybe Makayla chime in on this too, that number is very different. Can you talk about what that number is and then how you make that possible? How does a more fair food system actually exist on a small scale, and then how could that grow?
Well, I think what is a little different about our flour mill is that it was actually started by a farmer. So, if you look at farming as a business, farming is an absolutely backward business model. So if I said to you guys, okay, let's start a business, you're going to buy everything retail and sell everything wholesale. And then you're going to have weather and pests and all these other things as variables that you can't control in that process. Who the hell's going to do that, right? So, as I started into farming, I realized that something needed to change in that equation. And, my grandfather was a German immigrant. He was a master baker. And I grew up running around in a bake shop. And I hadn't even connected flour with what I was trying to do. And when I made that connection, I thought, okay, here's a way that we can change the equation for farmers. And it started out just, I wanted to change the equation for me. But as we got bigger, I was able to change this equation for my neighbors. And it also happened that the people that I got into business with, Greg and Neil, both wanted that same thing. So basically what it took was the middleman, i.e. Farmer Ground Flour, not being greedy, right? I've got no problem with capitalism, but I have a big problem with greed. So if you're willing to make less on your end as the processor, then you can give more of the money to the farmer because the farmer's taking all the risks. So that was like the basic tenet of us setting up this mill, was that we were setting up this mill as a marketing tool, not just for me, but for farmers. And in order to give, we're giving almost 3 times the commodity price that a farmer could get on the commodity market. And part of that is just, that's the way we're going to run this business because that's the way we believe business should be run. So, the whole system could change to that, but it's, I feel like we start with a small example and then we go from there, right? So we're this very small example, but that's the reason we do it that way. And having me there as an owner and a farmer, I'm bringing that perspective, the farm perspective, to the mill. And so that's kind of the way we do it. We also did not want to create this product that was this boutique flour that nobody could afford. So we've also decided to keep our flour price down so that everyday people can buy it. And that's also goes to the ethos is we're not trying to get rich at this. We're trying to make a small change in the food system, and we're trying to do what we feel right about. It was the same reason I switched from conventional farming to organic farming, was just because that's what I felt was the right thing. So, no, that's kind of the answer to that question.
It's a great answer.
Yeah.
And round of applause.
If I could add to that,
Please.
I've only been at the mill for about 5.5 years, which is less than half of its lifespan at this point. But I've always understood our mission to be just that, is that we are supporting not only Oechsner farms, but now we work with over a dozen other farms throughout New York State, and some reaching even farther with that goal in mind.
You answered my next question. How
Okay.
many farms are now? That's awesome. So now
Yeah.
over a dozen
Yeah.
farms. Yeah. Going back to the ingredient of flour, which is, like you mentioned, just such a taken for granted basic ingredient. How does the quality when it's good, affect human health and well-being? And maybe even I'll add the rise of gluten intolerance and tie that in as well. Yeah, talk about flour and how it's become at times maybe stigmatized, and why we should care about even all the different unique varieties that folks are growing, and how terroir can play a piece as well.
Maybe to you, Heidi.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. I sell my flour at the farmers markets, and one thing I hear all the time is this going to make my stomach hurt? And why? And all the time I go to Europe and I can eat this stuff, and so I'm happy to say that when I sell this flour that's made on a human scale using grain that's local to the mill, people say, recently my daughter's friend's mom was like, my daughter can eat this stuff. Will you use your flour? Anyway, so it's real. And it's mainly, I think, because grain, as it has become over the decades, dialed in for cheapness and predictability and consistency. And as long as it's safe and there's no mycotoxins and it's not going to get people sick, great. They're buying these big mills are buying so much grain every hour that they can't really think about where this grain is coming from, and it's such exacting specs to these specifics. So I think what we have is grain that meets these very straightforward specs, but unfortunately they've left out the fact that grain, so einkorn, for example, which Farmer Ground Flour is my einkorn partner, so my einkorn flour comes from these guys, and it's an ancient wheat, so it's known for being very digestible because wheat comes in all kinds of varieties and species. This is an ancient species of wheat, so its molecular structure is different. It doesn't have the same gluten in, it's got less gliadin. There's actual scientific reasons for why it is easier to digest. And so in Europe, people often go to Europe and have no problem because this is still mainstream. I think in Europe, bakers are still using this stuff as their regular flour, and you find it much less here. So that's the first thing I would talk about with digestibility.
Yeah, I can kind of speak to some of that where, flour is a primary ingredient. It's in a huge amount of the snacks that we eat all the time and the basic foods. So if it is a dead product, if there's nothing in it, if it's been, stripped down and processed until there's none of that good stuff left, then a huge part of our diet is lacking in what it needs. And so when we talk about an organic, stone ground, whole grain, whole flour, a lot of the commercial milling that is done nowadays is done with a process that is going to remove the bran and the endosperm from that grain. And that's where all the good stuff is, all the fiber and the nutrients and the antioxidants and and the fats and the flavor, that gets removed and sometimes added back in, sometimes not, sometimes added in with other things. And having a stone ground mill, all the parts of the grain are being ground as a whole together, and the whole grain is more than the sum of its parts.
I just want to double tap on that and go deeper, because you're saying something that's kind of mind-boggling when you think about it, which is that flour is kind of all of the good things are getting extracted, and then I think we all are used to seeing like this enriched flour on ingredient labels. Talk about that idea and what that even means, this enrichment process, which is the idea of just adding all of this good stuff that was removed, added back in, but in a not as good way. So maybe explain to all of us what that means.
What our main product at Farmer Ground Flour is what they call a high extraction bread flour, which is also like a European gray flour. So it's a flour that's sifted so that it bakes more like a white flour. But as Makayla said, if you take the germ out, take the bran out, and you're left with just pure endosperm, I mean, that's basically just starch. The other thing with flour is the one food ingredient that has absolutely no regulations about what additives can be put in it. So unless you really know where that thing is being made, what is being in it, they can add all these different pieces back into it that aren't necessarily of the grain to make that bake, or, as you said, bring those nutrients back that are being stripped out. And the other thing to think about is the reason we use stone mills. When we first started this mill, we didn't know anything about flour milling. So we started to talk to people. We decided to go with stone milling, even though it's way slower, because the stone milling process keeps the grain cooler. That saying nose to the grindstone, well, millers used to put their nose up against the mills to see what the temperature was, because they didn't want that to get too hot. And so we have temperature gauges on our mills to keep and it says right on there maximum temperature, and to keep the flour cool, we mill slow. Whereas in these industrial processes that Heidi was talking about, they're using these gang roller mills where they're just slowly crushing this thing down, this giant line. And as they do it, the flour is getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and you're losing a lot of nutrients. So, part of it is using certain varieties, and we grow varieties that are very specific, that we've done both taste testing on. I've done a lot of agronomic work on like Warthog hard red winter wheat, Glen hard red spring wheat, Redeemer wheat. These are all older varieties. And part of it is the variety, part of it is the way it's grown, and part of it is the way it's milled. So there's a bunch of different steps here that can have an effect on the nutritional quality, the flavor of what you're getting in the end. Hope that
Just
made
to add to that, what I also value is it's not always just stone ground versus roller milled, and that I think sometimes people want a white flour because a lot of times wonderful baked goods, it's, hopefully you guys tasted some of the stuff back there, is a combination, and there's white flour combined with some accent flour. So I think that there's a place for white flour, but not all roller milling is created equally. And one of the mills that I work with, the bread flour miller, Burkett Mills in Penn Yan, it's an identity preserved variety called Renan, and they're bringing in, they have a receiving house where they bring in grain from 3 or 4 farmers. So it's very much a question of what the grain is exactly what Thor just said. It's not as simple as roller milling bad, stone milling good. It's also what kind of roller milling you do, how big are these machines? There's something called lights out milling, when you can just leave for days on end and it's completely black and automated. So that's at the extreme end. what I was talking about before, where the grain is really not, it's just a completely dead grain. So that's not all roller milling.
Understood. Yeah. Good clarification. And also when we think about flour storage, I had Ethan from Burlap and Barrel here a little while ago and talked about like spices, and I think it's like an interesting thing where I think about like the things in my cupboard that have been there a while and whether or not they should be stored for a while, which is like really like shelf life, mold, spoilage, and other like storage concerns. Like, talk to us about that as it pertains to flour and when you should be enjoying it and what is the best, most nutrient-dense time to be enjoying that product.
Well, for our flour, we do recommend that people try to buy in small quantities. We sell in 2-pound bags, although most of our sales are in bulk. Buying it fresh, using it as soon as you can. We have a best by date of typically 1 year since it's been milled, but flour that is so alive as ours and as fresh, but it is a sign of real food that it goes bad. A lot of the commercial flours, with all the life taken out of it, sure, it can sit on a shelf for a very long time and be fine, but all flour will degrade, and if it gets wet, it's done for. So, yeah.
Yeah, and having the right moisture content is really important. I mean, this goes to, we're at the farm, this is where this starts. So when we're harvesting wheat, the wheat is mature at 30% moisture. And so, in order to store it, wheat will store it for a year at 13% moisture. So because New York is such a wet, humid place, a lot of times we're harvesting the wheat when it's in the 20s. And then, we have machines and dryers at the farm where we're drying this wheat down and making sure it's at the right moisture to both mill and then store as flour. Part of my job at the mill is to reach out and make sure the farmers that we work with know that they're growing something that people are going to eat. This isn't livestock food, and you need to pay attention. And none of this stuff is rocket science, but you got to do it, and you got to do it right. Or I see where we have most of the problems is harvest and storage. And that's where you really have to pay attention to detail, because if you get it in wet, it stays wet in the bin. There you get molds off, flavors, all of these other things. There's also certain weeds that, because we're organic, we have weeds in this that need to come out of the flour. So these are all, there's nothing complicated here, but the farmers also need to be educated, because growing food-grade grain, organic food-grade grain for the food market, it's just a matter of paying attention. And part of that is moisture content, and that bleeds into how long the flour is going to last, and does it have good flavor.
You guys do such a good job, though, that by the time it gets in the bags, I have people telling me literally 2 years after they'll be like, I made, just today, my friend was like, I made a rye brownie using your rye blend. And I was like, you mean from 3 years ago? And she's like, yeah, it was amazing. So
not recommended.
Not recommended. But like, this happens a lot where people are like, I just used it. It's incredible. So that's because you guys are doing a great job getting it to where.
We're trying.
Yeah.
Totally. I would say like a hot topic more broadly, probably globally, but certainly in the U.S., which is, and I think we can, Thor, this is really to you, like on the farm side. I think we're all interested to like kind of understand like what role does glyphosate, this really toxic, horrible chemical spray that's used widely in conventional grain production. Can you explain what it is, and then also how often does it appear in flour? And what are the effects that it has on both soil health and the food that ends up on our plates?
Oh, that's a lot of questions. Well, yeah, glyphosate is a weed killer, as you all know, and it really, people love it is because it actually, when you spray it on the leaves, it translocates down into the roots. So there's certain weeds, particularly in an organic system like bindweed, horse nettle, quackgrass that have these underground root systems called rhizomes or stolons that are very difficult to kill. And Roundup is so prized because it can translocate down and kill those weeds with those underground structures. It's used in wheat. There isn't GMO wheat. That is not a thing in the US right now. And so it isn't sprayed directly on the growing plant, as it is corn and soybeans, where they have resistant plants that have been genetically modified. Where wheat is, or where it's used in wheat, is as a desiccant. So I have not seen it used in New York as a desiccant, but in the western areas, what they do is they'll go through and they'll spray a wheat field right before harvest if there's lots of green weeds in there to make it, to kill everything. They'll also get sometimes a wheat field that hasn't ripened evenly, and they don't want to dry it. So they just kill it and then let it dry. And what happens is, because you're spraying it right before harvest, there's a lot of residue on the kernels, which you end up eating. Now, in New York State, this isn't typically done, or I haven't seen it, and the margins, I'm talking financial margins on wheat, are so slim in New York that if you were to do that, I think except in an emergency situation, you would lose money on it because of the expense. But it is used a lot out west. I mean, I'm not trying to promote Northeast agriculture here. Don't get me wrong. I mean, why would I do that? But grain grown in the Northeast, you could be pretty sure it's free of glyphosate, even if it was a conventional wheat. So,
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
did I answer all of those questions?
Yes. And I think it's interesting to think about, like, wheat isn't genetically modified yet. What's on the horizon? Is that like...
I don't know. I mean, and that goes, I think if the consumption of wheat, they were just talking about people in the United States were going to eat it, they would do it in a second. But a lot of our wheat is exported, and the countries that we export it to do not want that. So I think that's what's holding it back, from my understanding, as much as anything.
Well, let's keep holding it back.
Yeah, let's keep holding it back.
Heidi, jumping over to Unified Mills, which was founded to really reconnect farmers, millers, and bakers, how does your work bridge the disconnect between where grain is grown and the flour that ends up in a bakery?
Okay, so I learned all about this working at Green Market, which, if you're a New Yorker, you've probably shopped at one of the farmers markets there. And so way back, there was a new rule at Green. I think this is an interesting story, so you'll agree. But this is the genesis of this whole thing. So in 2009, there was a new rule that Green Market implemented that said the baker selling it, the market had to use a minimum percentage of local flour, which made sense. They had to be mission aligned.
Because they didn't want to buy our flour, that's the reason.
Well, they didn't want to buy your flour because they thought they couldn't.
Thought you could not grow food-grade wheat in New York State.
Right,
and
exactly.
we came down to a meeting here, and all the bakers basically told us to get lost.
Yeah, this is a very
June
interesting.
Russell got pissed off and
Yeah.
changed the rules of the green market so that they had to buy our flour.
Thank you,
Basically
June.
rammed it down their throat.
Thank you,
Yeah.
June.
Yeah, it's a really interesting, and yeah, there was pushback from all the bakers. They were like, "This is impossible. This stuff doesn't grow in the Northeast. There's just no way. It's too expensive. We can't put it in our recipes." So then the Green Market said, "We're going to help you." So June Russell started this whole initiative at Green Market, working with farmer ground flour and some bakers. Sullivan Street Bakery was one of the early adopters, innovators, who said, "Let us give it a try. We're gonna see if we can make this work." And of course, they made incredible bread. And then in 2014, we started a retail pilot. Could home bakers be also interested in this? And no one knew about these ingredients, so it was a lot of education and testing, like, is this real? Could people get excited about this? And then over the next 5 to 10 years, it was growing, and farmer ground flour was growing, and people were starting to see it, and eyes were being opened, and it was exciting. And then the pandemic happened, everything got turned upside down. You guys did well out of the pandemic.
I got a job.
Because I think King Arthur ran out, and you needed to start filling some of the King Arthur orders. Do you remember that?
To my knowledge, everybody fell in love with sourdough baking
Yeah.
during the pandemic.
Yeah, let's start a baking.
The sales for Farmer Ground for the 2-pound bags, wherever they were ending up, were through the roof.
Yeah.
And so myself and my partner were brought on for just like warehouse packing, just extra hands. And then we stayed.
Yeah. Anyway, but the retail stand closed. Some of you may have shopped at the Grow NYC grain stand, maybe. Yes, I see some nodding. It was like a pretty cherished, wonderful little like world that we were building. So that closed. And I just thought something needs to continue the momentum that we started. So I started this brand. The idea is to continue to kind of aggregate and curate this flower. Flower is a very, very exciting, it's like indie music. Like, this is an exciting time for flower. It is. It's like, oh my God, it's everywhere. There's some millers right here in this very room who are making incredible flower. Hopefully you guys can mingle and I can introduce you to them after this. But anyway, it's just thrilling. And the thought that there's all this amazing flower that's not making it so that so many home bakers don't even know about it and can't get it, even when they know about it, and where do I get it? And I was like, there needs to be a better way. So that was what I started the brand for. Yeah.
I love the story
Thank
and the
you.
history. That's like what makes this all so fun is like all these everything, the way that Farmer Ground started was out of a need. Unified
Right.
Mills started was out of a need. And that's, that's how indie music started too, I think, was out of a need. So it's all connected. When you talk to bakers, what tends to shock them most about where their flour actually comes from?
Yeah. I mean, I think people definitely don't know that there's lots of different, not only varieties of wheat, but different species of wheat. I think people just are constantly like, what, wheat? What are you doing? Why are you at the farmer's market? What? Flour is not local. What? So, I don't know. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, when we made these shirts, I started wearing them all the time, and especially in Ithaca, in and around Ithaca, the local area where we're sold and used in many bakeries and restaurants and shops, people started coming up to me and saying, "Oh my God, do you work there? Like, I can eat bread now. I love your flour. I had no idea that this was possible." And some of them find out that we are right up the road, and it creates a connection between what you see in a store and what you're using and what's on your plate to a face. And we have the term bread basket and breaking bread and all these things because bread has always been at the center of human connection, human civilization. So I think that we got away from that a little bit. We have more mouths to feed than ever. And the commercial path that we took to improve our output, we lost that face-to-face connection, and we lost that that connection.
Relationships, yeah.
Those relationships.
Yeah, I think something that I found interesting was when we were first working on Farmer Ground flour and trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to make good flour in New York State, which everyone said we couldn't. First was figuring out the varieties. And the next thing was realizing that each field of wheat actually produces a different quality of grain. And one of the biggest hurdles we had when we got started was our flour was really inconsistent. And this was driving the bakers nuts. I think bakers are willing to make a few changes, like year to year and things like that, but they want something that's relatively consistent. Doesn't have to be completely consistent, but ours was completely inconsistent. And what we started to do was we started to do quality tests on the wheat from each field to try to figure out, okay, what are we doing wrong here? And the degree of our ignorance I cannot overstate. We had no clue what we were doing. We started from scratch, not knowing anything. So when we started testing each field, we realized that each field was its own little microclimate, different soils. And this, I don't want to compare this to wine, but like wine has a certain, each year is a little different, the wheat is really different each year. And even within fields, or we farm in about a 20-mile radius of where my home farm is, different microclimates can produce different wheats. So figuring that out and then figuring out how to blend these wheats together to come up with a product that isn't going to drive the bakers completely bonzo was a really important step. And I think probably out west, where you have a more consistent climate, you get a more homogeneous crop, but that's not what we're dealing with here. So, that was an important lesson to learn, that actually wheat is more diverse in terms of how it's going to bake each year than we thought.
And Stefan Senders, who's the baker at Wide Awake Bakery, he talked a lot about the relationship between the baker and the flour. And maybe it's a matter of retraining how we think about flour as we bake with it, that it's not consistency, inconsistency, sort of switching it from a liability to it's actually diversity, which is an asset. And how can we embrace that and sort of rethink kind of how we interact with flour? And Stefan talks a lot about, just kind of almost being in dialogue with the flour and learning, okay, it needs an extra period of rest, and it's a little different from last time, but
And that's how that bakery got started, was this Stefan. We were having him bake test our flour because we were having so much pushback from the bakers, and he was making such good bread that I said, hey, why don't we start a bakery? And the thing I was thinking is then we have a test bakery. And each farm's grain from each year goes to the bakery. Not only do we have a lab at the farm where we do lab tests, we bake each farm's bread and get feedback from the bakery to help us figure out how do we blend all these different farms' flours together to make a consistent, high-quality bread flour. And that has been actually critical. The other thing that Stefan was able to do is he speaks the language of baking. And so when we got a new bakery and they were having problems, he could be our
whisperer,
troubleshooter. Yeah, like, hey, do this, do that, because he works with it every day. And that's really been helpful to making our flour better and making it more accepted by commercial bakeries, which is, an important part of what we wanted to do.
Yeah, how do you transcend the true craft of it, which is amazing and awe-inspiring when you see it, to the more generic, how does this become more commonplace? Not to minimize the value of the flour, but expand the distribution of its use, basically.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Consistency is real.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like...
Maybe Stefan knows how to speak to the flour, because every baker
right,
at White
exactly. Yeah.
I also want to
Philosophy.
talk about, how the pandemic shifted habit. I think that's a really interesting thing. It shifted habits. I think we all can think back and laugh about, maybe we had sourdough starters in the fridge. Probably 9 in 10 sourdough starters in America has died at this point. How what have you seen? What have you seen in terms of the continued interest in craft flour? What gives you hope, but what also needs to be reawoken, if anything, to kind of continue that? I think really, one of the positives that came out was this renewed interest in baking at home and using our hands and being, more creative in our kitchens. And then, as life has sort of reverted back to normal, so to speak, but how do we kind of keep that going, and what are you seeing or doing in each of your businesses to kind of perpetuate that?
You start that, Heidi.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an exciting, as more flour, as more of this wonderful flour comes online, we're also getting the artisan bakers who know how to work with it, who are embracing local flour more and more. So I kind of look to them to show the way and talk about the flour. And there's someone in the audience, but he doesn't want me to call him out, but I want to call him out. But there's a mill called Brooklyn Granary and Mill in Gowanus, and Patrick Shaw Kitch, who's here, is doing a lot of that work. And I think a lot of it starts with the kind of tastemakers, the trendsetters, the people who have the ear of, the people who maybe can afford the higher price right now of this flour. So kind of looking to the professionals to show us how it's done.
Well, I'm sure that Thor knows more about the business side for us at the mill, but I can speak at least to, what I've seen over the last 5 years. And, whether it's meeting people on the street or I respond to all of the email inquiries that we get, I've seen that we have only grown. And I get emails very frequently of, hey, I'm starting a bakery and I want your stuff. How do I get it? So my perspective has been that people are still very interested and that it's only climbing.
Awesome.
I would agree with Makayla. It seems like, I can only speak for Farmer Ground Flour, but, we're basically milling at capacity.
Yes.
And can't keep up with the demand. So
I do have to turn people down.
yeah, and so, this is either going to require us to expand, which I don't think we want to do because we want to stay small, but we have to think about the food system beyond ourselves. I think what this does is this opens up possibilities for other people to get in and to start milling. I'm working with these 2 Amish guys in Penyan that are starting a tiny little mill. They want to service just the Amish community, but, I'm encouraging them to do this because I feel like we need more mills. When we got into this, what we found was milling was this secret society, and all the larger mills that we went to, they wouldn't even let us in the door or show us what they were doing. And I think at that point, we decided that anybody who wants to learn how to operate a flour mill or grow food-grade grains, we're going to open the door. And I've 2 of the things I'm most proud of is Janie's Mill in Danforth, Illinois, and Meadowlark Mill out in Wisconsin. Both these farmers came to me. I spoke at something somewhere where they heard what I was doing. They came, I showed them what I was doing. We opened up our mill, showed their millers what to do, and now they're operating really successful mills out in the Midwest, selling a lot of local flour. And, that ethos is what I want. I'm interested in what happens to Farmer Ground Flour, but I'm really interested in expanding this. My small little town of Newfield, New York used to have 3 flour mills in it. There was flour mills all over New York State, and we need to repopulate the state, whether it be, that has to be, and it's created by demand, so all of you have a part in this. I have my part, you have your part, but if we create the demand, people are going to want to do this, and this is the way we change the food system, right? So, when you go to the supermarket or go somewhere and buy something, it's a vote. You're voting for a type of food system that you want, right? And that's, I think, been lost on American consumers. They're just buying stuff, and they don't know what, I think if they knew what the heck was going on in agriculture, they would think twice about it. But it's encouraging to me to see you all here actually interested in where your food comes from. And I think that's the start of changing the food system, right? So,
yeah. Totally. And I think what you said, just to add on what you said, I think the idea that Farmer Ground shouldn't aspire, at least out of the New York mill, to ever want to sell to the Midwest, because that defeats the purpose of regional food and the local food system. And so open sourcing how to have a Farmer Ground in Wisconsin is actually the better answer.
Yeah, just to be a model of what is possible. I think that's a really great goal. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming out on a rainy Tuesday evening to join us. So before we continue, I just want to say thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening to Know Your Food, a podcast from farm to people. If today's conversation got you thinking differently about what's on your plate or where it comes from, we'd love if you shared this episode with a friend or left us a review. It helps more people discover the folks reimagining the future of food from the ground up. And if you're in the New York tri-state area, you can shop from our network of small, regenerative, independent farms and makers at farmtopeople.com and stay in the loop by signing up for our newsletter or joining us on Instagram at farmtopeople. Until next time, eat well and know your food.